Noam, Noam Chomsky went on the Intercepted podcast with Mehdi Hasan, and they talked about, the 2020 general election, which will obviously be, Joe Biden against Donald Trump. And Mehdi Hasan has been pretty vocal on Twitter, basically voter shaming people who say they aren't going to support Joe Biden, and how he's a existential threat, and all of these type of things. So a lot of their conversation, a lot of Mehdi's and Noam's conversation was about the 2020 election, like I said. And Mehdi asked, I've seen a lot of people online, a lot of potential Bernie supporters, even his former national press secretary, some high profile social media influencers, in relation to Kyle Kalinske and that whole Twitter battle Mehdi and Kyle got into. And so what's your perspective, Noam Chomsky, on this never Biden phenomenon? And as Noam Chomsky has always said, he's been in favor of voting for the lesser of two evils, and he obviously thinks that Joe Biden fits that narrative. He was basically saying, if you're in a swing state and you don't vote for Joe Biden, you're voting for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a existential threat. Chomsky referred to him as a malignancy. We got to get rid of this malignancy. We got to get rid of this cancer. Trump's getting us closer to nuclear war. He doesn't take climate change seriously at all. He's rolling back all of these environmental regulations. He's, building up, the threats that we're posing against, Russia, with getting rid of these different kind of weapons treaties that we've had with them in the past, etc., etc. So, it's somewhat, understandable, the perspective that Chomsky is taking. I live in a comfortably blue state, Washington State. It's going to go to the Democratic nominee, no matter if it's Joe Biden or not. It's obviously Joe Biden. So I don't feel obligated at all to vote for Joe Biden. He hasn't given me any good reason to do that. If I was in a swing state, that potentially might change my perspective, because what Chomsky also pointed out in this interview with Mehdi Hasan, and he's pointed out oftentimes, is that these small differences, when they're exercised by the figurehead like the president, who has a lot of power, these small differences can actually lead to some pretty big real world material consequences. The differences between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Yes, Biden would be a little bit better probably on Supreme Court picks. He wouldn't be stacking the federal courts with these completely right-wing, conservative wacko justices. He's a little bit better on the environment, with things, wanting to join the Paris climate agreement. And, he supports a $15 minimum wage now, I guess. So, there is some validity to that argument that Chomsky's making, that there would be real world benefits to, a lot of people and the globe more broadly, if we had Biden as president as opposed to Donald Trump. Chomsky also made the argument that a Biden presidency, the left would be able to organize from outside the political system to put pressure on him to move even further to the left with his different, policy agendas. So he, thinks that it would be a lot easier to push a Democratic president to the left, more towards things like a Green New Deal or Medicare for All. But those things in particular, I don't think I mean, Joe Biden, for fuck's sake, said that he would veto Medicare for all if it was somehow able to pass the House and the Senate. So, I mean, Chomsky makes some good points, but there's a pretty big disclaimer that I think needs to be put in place there, and something that Chomsky didn't mention or elaborate on or talk about at all during this interview with Mehdi Hasan is the fact that if we're always supposed to just, get in line, vote for the Democratic nominee no matter who they are, even if you are in a swing state, even if they are the lesser of two evils, even if they aren't proposing any type of sweeping populist progressive agenda that the U.S. Desperately needs, in terms of things like healthcare. So we actually have, a universal healthcare system, so we don't have tens of thousands of people dying each year. So we have a Green New Deal, so we have an inhabitable planet to live on. So we have, tuition-free college, so people aren't shackled to tens and thousands of dollars of student loan debt. By always going with the lesser of two evils, even if there still are a really shitty neoliberal centrist corporatist candidate, and we keep propping up the same old bullshit Democratic candidates, and they become president and don't actually try to tackle any of these, structural issues, then we're going to see candidates like Donald Trump get elected. And if Biden gets elected and isn't able to get pushed further to the left than he actually needs to be to get him more in line like what a Bernie Sanders presidency would be, then after Biden, it's going to be somebody that's even worse than Trump, because unfortunately, even Bernie fell into this trap of, painting Donald Trump as, this deranged madman that we got to get out of there at all costs, when actually Andrew Yang had the right perspective that Trump is just a symptom of a larger problem. And, we've had multiple decades of, neoliberal policies where, all of the harmful things that are happening to society, the working people feel the brunt of that, while, the top 1% and all these wealthy corporations and companies are continuing to get richer and richer. We have just insane levels of wealth and income inequality in the United States. And, people in 2016 saw Trump as this change-making candidate. They saw Hillary Clinton as a reflection of the Democratic establishment, just somebody who wanted to push the status quo further towards a Obama agenda. A lot of people that actually supported, Obama actually ended up voting for Donald Trump or not voting at all, because they saw that, Obama ran on this campaign of hope and change, and he, did and does a really good job of using that populist progressive rhetoric when he actually governed as a neoliberal centrist, where they bailed out Wall Street while 5+ million people got kicked out of their homes during that great recession. He started a bunch of wars. He increased, the surveillance state, the drone warfare program. He went to Flint, did nothing for that water crisis they were experiencing there, but took that little drink of water and just this really sick political ploy. He talked about how he made the U.S. the greatest producer of oil, and then he got out and gives $500,000+ speeches to Wall Street, and the people saw Trump as the change candidate because he did use that populist rhetoric and campaigned on it, and obviously hasn't governed from that perspective clearly. So the problem with just saying that you're going to vote Democrat no matter what is you're going to be stuck with that Democratic shit sandwich more oftentimes than not, Joe Biden being the most current example of that. You go back to Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama was a centrist. Clinton was a centrist. He governed through that strategy of triangulation, trying to go more towards the right and totally throw the progressive part of the Democratic Party, under the bus. So I think what Chomsky should have said is that, yes, people in swing states, if they, want to create less harm in the world, then they should support Joe Biden. But it's a huge, big, juicy but, Joe Biden actually needs to make some concessions to the left, to Bernie Sanders supporters in particular, and adopt some of his policies, which Chomsky correctly said that that's what Biden should do. If he was giving advice to Biden, that's what Chomsky said. He should adopt some of his, Bernie's policies. But I mean, again, if Bernie was actually serious about, having any type of leverage over Biden and maybe getting him to adopt a couple of these core policies like Medicare for all, like canceling student loan debt, like tuition-free college, like universal UBI during this crisis, like the Green New Deal, etc., then he would have told Biden's like, fuck off, bro. I'm not going to help you out unless you actually say that you're going to support some of these things that are really important to me and my supporters, and if not, you can go kick rocks. And I actually think that Chomsky gives Bernie Sanders a little bit too much credit than Bernie actually deserves, because Mehdi was like, it's like Bernie lost in 2016, he lost now, the movement or Bernie's campaign kind of seemed like a failure. Chomsky pushed back on that and was like, well, he did a pretty big service. He galvanized this movement, and they were able to shift the political discourse, the Overton window, on issues like, healthcare, Medicare for all, and whatnot, considerably more to the left. It's like, yes, that's true, but I mean, what did that accomplish? Bernie didn't win anything. The point of running elections is to get elected, and then once you're elected to the presidency, then you fight like hell to get the Green New Deal, to get Medicare for all passed, to cancel student loan debt, to legalize weed, to fixing our horribly racist and corrupt criminal justice system, to ending our empire so we don't have 700 bases all around the world that are, highly polluting and just drags to all these countries around the world. We have our bases, etc., etc. So I mean, what Bernie didn't get shit accomplished, in my perspective, unfortunately, besides, raising people's consciousness. Yes, that's good, but politics, in a sense, is a zero-sum game. You either win the election or you don't. Bernie lost both, and he completely gave away all of his leverage by dropping out and endorsing Joe Biden 1 week later without getting not one single policy concession from Biden. And you dubbed yourself as some political revolutionary. You're part of this revolution, not me, us. You're a champion for the working people, but you completely dropped the ball, from my perspective, Bernie, and then you're calling your supporters who don't support Joe Biden irresponsible. What was irresponsible of you is completely giving away all of that political capital that you had. A huge chunk of the Democratic Party supports you. The left progressive flank, at least 30% of Democratic voters supported Bernie. He had huge leverage. He didn't use it. So I just don't agree with Chomsky there. I think Bernie Sanders is unfortunately a very weak candidate and isn't willing to stand up and fight when the times get tough, and he's just willing to unfortunately fall in line with what the Democratic establishment wants him to do. He was basically had Barack Obama talking to his ear throughout the campaign, and he got him to kind of drop out, it sounds like, and you know, all of these things. It's like, I mean, Bernie, unfortunately, is just a little sheepdog for the Democratic Party, corralling people into it, where people's hopes and dreams go to die, because the Democratic Party, unfortunately, is just corrupt and immoral to its core. And I mean, look at the nominee. Look at Joe Biden, somebody who has very serious and sad cognitive decline, decades-long record of just supporting some of the worst policy decisions, you know, in our government, the corruption piece, the huge lack of enthusiasm behind his campaign, no grassroots movement. This is who the Democratic establishment wanted to prop up over a candidate who actually, you know, had some really good policy ideas, but who wasn't, unfortunately, willing to fight for them in the end. And then you can go back to, you know, the third bailout package, how Bernie also supported that, along with all the other progressive members of Congress and Senate. So it wasn't just him. So, I mean, I could keep talking about this for a while, but in summation, I mean, Chomsky makes some good points, but if we keep just letting the Democrats get off the hook by pushing these neoliberal, centrist, corporatist down our throats without any type of policy concessions, then what comes after, when there's no type of structural change and people in this country are still really suffering because they don't have health care, because their wages are stagnating, because our environment's falling apart, because our you know, our infrastructure's falling apart, because we're, you know, the environment is going to shit. All of these things, the huge and vast wealth and income inequality disparities, all of these things are going to keep getting worse. And so what happens after the next Biden or Harris or whatever neoliberal centrist Democrat might get elected, whatever comes after that is going to be much worse than Trump, unfortunately. So if we don't actually take the stances like, no, fuck off, you're not getting my vote, and that unless you actually commit to some of the progressive platforms that are really important to voters, especially Bernie Sanders voters, like Medicare for All, like a Green New Deal, like tuition-free college, like canceling student loan debt, like ending the wars, like taxing Wall Street, etc., then fuck off. Like Lawrence O'Donnell, before he became a you know, multi-million-dollar MSNBC host, there was this interview that came out not too long ago from him back in the day saying, you know, I worked in the Democratic Party, and the Democratic establishment, they know they can always count on the left to vote for them, so why the fuck would the Democratic Party offer any type of policy concessions to the left? The answer is obviously they're not going to do that, because they don't have to. If you're just going to fall in line and vote blue no matter who, it's a horrible political strategy. You actually need to make them fight to get your vote, say, no, fuck off. Again, if you don't support some of these key policies that are really important to me and my constituents, speaking as Bernie Sanders now, then you can go kick sand. This ain't blue no matter who bullshit. You need to completely get rid of that. So Chomsky makes some good points, but I think unfortunately he leaves some things out of his analysis that would actually make a lot more sense from my perspective. So those are my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comment sections down below. Peace. Much love.